Welcome to the Outliers journey. My name is John Seaton. In this podcast, we typically explore individuals in the African American and Caribbean immigrant communities who manage to overcome adversity and somehow achieve success in the tech world, despite the odds against them. One of the common threads in many of these stories that I hear from individuals is that there's usually an organization or an individual who's opened up their eyes to new possibilities, and it changes their life. If you can't see it, you can't be it. So for this episode, the focus will be on exploring how the Camden Dream Center and the Cisco Networking Academies are helping to create Outliers, helping individuals achieve success despite the odds. So today I want to welcome Pastor Keith Davis, who is president and CEO of the Camden Dream Center. He is a senior pastor, community leader, technologist, and thought leader in technology and workforce development. Pastor Davis, welcome to the podcast.
John, it is a thrill to be with you on this podcast, and what a joy it is to be able to share some of our journey with you and your listeners. And perhaps I always say, if just one person is able to glean from the journey we've had to bring about an impact and change in their lives, it's all worth it. Thank you so very much.
So thank you again for joining. I'm hoping that you can tell a little bit about your background and how you found yourself to be the leader of the Camden Dream Center.
Wow. Well, you mentioned exposure. I had early exposure to tech. My father was the community technologist, and I can remember at 8 years old, traveling from home to home, delivering repaired TV sets that he worked on in our basement. So I was a geek from the start and learned an awful lot observing my dad and his brother, who worked at RCA. And you know, Camden was once the Silicon Valley of the East Coast. It was the original tech hub for our country. So that's where it started. And I think combined with that is essentially a spirit for entrepreneurship because, as I said, my father was the community technologist, but he also had a day job. So I learned how to hustle and to work and that work ethic. So that's where it started for me early on. And then later in life, as the divestiture of Bell back in the 80s, that spirit for entrepreneurship emerged. And because I pastored in the inner city, it was very difficult for me to make a living in that environment to support my children and my family through college. So I was always bivocational. And so I leveraged my fascination with technology and started a company, a systems integration company, and ran it for 30 years. So that's basically how I got into understanding the power of technology, how to think critically, and a successful background in my career as a systems integrator. And once I retired, it was a no-brainer to leverage that background in the community that I was serving in as a pastor. 12 years ago, I became the non-paid, emphasizing without pay, CEO of this nonprofit. At that point was 30 years old, that was spun up by some church leaders in our congregation that was traditionally doing your prisoner reentry and your food pantry and things of that nature. And we just built on that. We brought some friends in from Wharton, some smart people from Harvard. These are MBAs. And we reshaped what we were doing, rebranded, so that from that rebranding, that entire year, the Camden Dream Center emerged. It's been a great journey. We have students now through our partnership with Cisco around the globe, and we still do food pantry, but I'm happy to say that we were just recently awarded a McKinsey Scott grant to develop urban gardening and partnering with my tech partners because it's all about technology, how to produce 1,000 bushels of collard greens in a week.
Wow.
So really having economic development impact in the city of Camden and our region, partnering with the same universities and schools that we've always partnered with in the Academy program, and doing some great things in that space. So that's how it started, and that's where we are today.
So, how would you describe the overall mission of the Camden Dream Center?
The mission is to empower individuals who reside in underserved communities by offering educational and academic enrichment in partnership with local school districts and local colleges and universities, and make careers available through skills development that traditionally have not been made available to them. I mean, I have had an extraordinary career in technology, but it's because I had early exposure. And I continue to be guided in my thinking that if I could just help others get that exposure. For instance, we have a young lady who's been a part of our program for 5 years. Currently, she's a rising senior, and she's working in, mentioning no names, flipping burgers. I won't say where.
Mm-hmm.
Can't really function during the day because she's so tired, and she's still not making enough money. And I had a couple of our partners here, directors in their respective companies, large technology companies, who are and will offer her an apprenticeship, really an internship. We moved from externships to internships to apprenticeships. They're offering her, because she's still in school, an internship making $25 an hour. That changes her life, so that now her thinking is transformed, that she doesn't need to flip burgers. And it's my understanding that she and my grandson, they play games during the day, just having fun with calculus. Did you hear what I said? They're playing games with calculators, flipping burgers. Now we have to stop that. Something has to change. So that's how we are change makers within our community. Like Steve Jobs says, we have to make it cool again to be smart. Being smart is cool.
Absolutely. You mentioned a term that I'm not sure everyone's familiar with, externship. Can you describe what an externship is versus an internship?
That's a good question. You know, I explained it to you without really telling you. My father gave me an externship. I didn't know it back then, but each time I carried those TVs back to observe him on his test desk and working with his voltage meters,
Mm-hmm.
measuring resistance. You can imagine at 8 years old, I had all of this stuff available to me. By the time I was 12, I was building hi-fi stereos, and that's what it was back then. Soldering, wiring. So that is a exposure to the career is an externship. Doesn't mean you have hands-on. It means that you are what we call in traditional trades job shadowing. Now, notice I shared that with you that I did that with my dad. Now, you know the condition of the inner city home or non traditional student who is contemplating a career in technology. Sometimes they don't have homes, they're homeless.
Yeah.
They don't have a dad as I did. So I'd like to start externships at middle school so that these kids can see what an engineer looks like. They can see what the technology looks like, not necessarily on the consumer side. They all handle cell phones and iPhones. But what makes that work? What happens when you push the button to begin to understand what happens behind the scenes? And I think that's how I look at an externship.
Now, what I never knew, and you mentioned this, so I learned something from you already, is that Camden used to be considered the Silicon Valley of New Jersey, and RCA, I guess, was based there. You had a lot of work with your dad and exposure to fixing TVs, etc. Why is it so important now for the Camden Dream Center to be in Camden? I assume something changed in Camden where technology is no longer the focus and there's other forces at hand.
That's a great question. Because the discipline for technology is so deeply immersive throughout any career path. The whole idea around reading and computing at grade level, that's important for us. If we're going to change the landscape around poverty and opportunities for access, then as early as possible, we must begin to work with the children and their families in this space. It's critically important. Now, where I live it's far more affluent. In fact, my neighbor is an expert in cybersecurity. On one side of me, the other side is a physician. And I mean, that's essentially. I think you know what I'm saying. It isn't needed there. So why do it there? It is needed, okay, in Trenton, in Camden, in Newark, in Patterson, in Harlem. You know, it is needed in these communities that are pockets of poverty and crime. And for me, an associate of mine who is an accomplished educator indicated to me that if Dr. King were alive today, he would say to us, the work you're doing is prime time social justice work, because he would say to us, what we did back in the 60s was necessary, but where we are currently in the 21st century, there's no need right now to do a whole lot of the kind of modeling they did back then. That made what we're doing available today.
Right.
So teaching our kids how to read and compute at grade level and exposing them to entrepreneurship and how these skills can lead to at least a living, sustainable wage, if not far beyond that, if they learn to own it. I spoke for a group of kids at West Orange High School last week, 50 kids, and began to light their candle around entrepreneurship in the space of technology. If they could just acquire the skills to take ownership of what they learn and move it into the marketplace, they can really have a dramatic impact in their communities.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful statement. And looking at some of the statistics that are out there in terms of representation of minorities in science, technology, engineering, and math professions, there's certainly a disparity there. And what makes that so important to understand is that when you look at the pay and you talk about sustainable wages, the pay with STEM jobs is significantly higher than non-STEM jobs. And now you compound that by the fact that there's underrepresentation of minority and STEM jobs. I imagine that's why what you're doing in the work to further drive increased participation of minorities in STEM is so important.
Exactly, exactly. And our partnerships is quite extensive. We've been very fortunate that we're approaching this collaboratively with some of the leading people around thought leadership when it comes to STEM education, and well-known institutions that are there and willing to change structures now and policy at the highest level in order to be more just and equitable in terms of how we make opportunities available to our young people.
Yeah, and how do you drive that pipeline? Because I know a lot of organizations are saying that they need folks within STEM, but a lot of times they struggle to get the pipeline. And when you look at the participation of minorities in STEM degrees in colleges, there's still underrepresentation there. So the pipeline isn't there. So now there's this thought of this concept of skills versus credentials, right? College diplomas versus certifications. And I've been exposed and, through some research, discovered this organization called 110.org, where a lot of large corporations are looking to re-credential the jobs that they're advertising. What's your view on this whole topic of diplomas versus certifications?
Yeah, what you're speaking to now are the structural barriers that in some cases is intentional in order to prevent access, going back years now. And I'll not mention organizations' names, but if I mention them, these are the people who really created those structures, whom I have relationship with, and who admit what they did was wrong, and even use terms like immoral. And now we're changing the whole entire landscape with in partnership with the same people who are responsible for these barriers. Let me also say and comment that the pledge of CEOs is only the starting place. What I have found and seen is the rank and file, um, that C-suite down, where you have your decisions are made, policy is implemented, but when you get to the ground level where these programs are implemented, there's still, in my opinion, too much implicit bias. And so, in our case, Chuck Robbins may say, this is what we're going to do. He throw hundreds of $1 million at it. But if your rank and file management are still, and I wouldn't use the term racist because I work with many people, they're not racist, but they still have implicit bias.
Sure. Yep.
And we all do. And so until we overcome that, then the playing field still is a challenge. But what we can do is begin to recognize that the barrier for higher ed that's been there for far too long needs to be changed. Also, my final comment on that is the brilliance that it takes a youngster to walk from one end of town to the other to the high school without getting into trouble requires extraordinary skills.
That's right.
Negotiating skills, compromise skills, strategic skills, what alley to use to avoid the corners. Those are the skills that we need to begin to measure as well. And they're just as important as the skill to pass an SAT, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more. I interviewed manager at Cisco, Vinaya Springer, who talked about her interview process. And when she interviewed, there was a certain bar of a certain GPA that she didn't meet. And the interviewer posed a question to her, we have some concerns on that GPA. Can you tell us a little bit about, why that you had that grade that you did? And when she opened up about the journey that she had where something happened in her life sophomore year, that she had to overcome all this adversity. So when you look at, let's say it's a 2.8 versus a 3.5, what she had to overcome to get that GPA was far more than someone who, had an easy ride. So opening up how you view whether or not someone is qualified or not, I think is something that folks need to look a little bit different at.
Right, and we need to redefine the assessments and how to measure a person's effectiveness for the particular position that's being interviewed for. That's an excellent example. Thank you so much for sharing that.
So when you look at tech today, there's a lot of different areas that kids can get excited about. There's artificial intelligence, there's cybersecurity, there's electric vehicles. What are you seeing in terms of demand from industry that someone who's looking to get into STEM, where you're seeing the demand is right now?
Well, we know that demand currently is in the area of innovating around how technology is leveraged in the healthcare space is huge. And that aligns with quality of life. I mean, it's a big area. And because you've been to our place, we're in a facility owned by a hospital, largest healthcare system in South Jersey, one of the largest in the state. I'm seeing a lot of demand there. I'm hearing and receiving a lot of calls, a lot of interest in that space, also in the AG space, the agriculture space,
Mhm.
and how technology is being applied to address food deserts, which is why we're in that space. So while I may have mentioned previously 1,000 heads of collard greens a week, technology is making that possible. So that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
fascinating,
Yeah.
and it also leads to sustainability, both from a community perspective, a quality of life perspective, economic development. A lot of those components are there. So I would say agriculture related and healthcare.
Okay. Interesting. Now I want to switch gears a little bit, Pastor, and talk about Cisco Networking Academy. So, how long have you been involved with the Networking Academy, and how does one start one? If there's a company out there that's looking to start Cisco Networking Academy, how do they go about it?
Well, it's a joy. I mean, I'm telling you, it's been 10 years, and the person that I work with, Marie Zwickert, is a teacher by trade and profession and a technologist when it comes to this space. It was through her leadership that we came into the program. After a year, she saw some of the skills perhaps that we had. We were having some success, and she offered us the opportunity to become a partner with Cisco. So we went from being an academy to a partner. And I've been a partner with Cisco for 10 years. And it's my understanding that we're the only academy support and instructor training center in the country that is led by, and I, excuse my way I phrase it, black folk, and I'm delighted. I'm excited that they have embraced us. They understand the power of diversity to the extent that not only have they allowed us to grow, but they have fueled our growth and enhanced us to the extent that now across the country, we're in similar communities like Camden across this country, developing academies by way of our Academy Support and Instructor Training Center. So, in my opinion, it is the greatest IT training program in the world, and I can say that not just from being rhetorical, but through by being in the program, I have relationships with other colleagues around the globe, and have placed interns from Paterson, New Jersey, and New York City with scientists, computer scientists in India to test out some of the programs and build some of the tools that we're using today in the WebEx environment and in the NetAcad environment. And that was made possible because my colleague is a former Bell Labs worker, engineer. Yeah, so he knew someone at Cisco who was over the project. And you know how Bell Labs guys are. It's a community. It's
Mhm.
like being a Marine.
That's
Once you're
it.
a Marine, you're always a Marine.
That's
Once you're a Bell Lab guy, that's it.
that's it.
And
Yep.
so that was a very fortuitous scenario and situation which enabled us to do some great things as a Cisco Networking Academy.
So you mentioned that you're a Cisco Academy partner. How does that differentiate from a Network Academy?
Okay, there are three tiers of relationship. One is that of an academy where you're delivering content and to students directly. We still have that relationship. We have cohorts that we spin up and deliver content to. Secondly, you can be an academy support center, which means you identify school districts, colleges, universities, and other nonprofits that would like to become an academy. We are charged with identifying those potential opportunities and onboarding them in support of their successful implementation. And then there's a third tier, which is instructor support center, where train the trainer model exists, where we have some of the elite trainers from across the country within the program that we bring in to train the teachers at the academies that we develop for a successful implementation. So those are the three tiers
Okay,
and how you delineate between the three.
got it. Now, the last 2 years haven't been easy for anyone, obviously, because of the pandemic. How did training and instruction adjust, over the last 2 years? And how do you see it being different, if it's going to be different going forward?
Well, that's a great question, John, because none of us have experienced a pandemic where, in our case, 90% of our income is derived by and through academic institutions, all of all of whom were closed for 2 years.
That's right.
So the question is, how do we exist? How do we survive?
Yeah, that's the real question, right?
And I tell you how we survive. We learn more and more about WebEx and how the versions of WebEx and the features of WebEx, and relied heavily on WebEx, and still to this day, WebEx is my best friend. And so we're in a hybrid scenario now. I believe going forward it will remain hybrid. I believe it is the new norm. If you don't have the skills and the tools to operate remotely, and then at key times bring your people together for more in-person, higher level of direct impact, then your business model, I don't believe, will be sustainable. If you're relying entirely on in-person, unless it's like a food service or a restaurant or something like that. I'm talking about the service business here now. What we do, you must incorporate a hybrid approach and a framework around that in order to succeed.
Pastor Davis, I want to thank you for enlightening us on the mission of the Camden Dream Center, the importance of exposing those who haven't been exposed to STEM professions and giving them an opportunity for education. What I want to leave this discussion with is a call to action. What can corporations and individuals do to, as I say, create more outliers and opportunities for those in situations where they may not be exposed to STEM, folks in the African American community in the inner city, and as you say, in those neighborhoods those less than affluent neighborhoods who don't need, right, the little push that an organization like Camden Dream Center can give them. What can corporations and individuals do?
Yeah, I think being proactive is what they could do more of. I believe, as I stated previously, we have the CEO commitment. That is clearly there. They've even applied money in budgets to address this. They've hired DE&I officers at the cabinet level, C-suite level, which these are all great steps. But if you're not proactive at the lower level of management, where the rubber meets the road, where those decisions are made, where there is still implicit bias, then there is a bottleneck. Not will be, there is a bottleneck. I could tell you that right now. It is there. Until they become more proactive to maybe begin to measure their impact around those specific outcomes, and then report that back to find maybe perhaps where the bottlenecks are and what systems can be improved, um, things will continue not to have the kind of success. We want to have the kind of success that we potentially could have. So that's what I would say should take place. Organizations need to be more proactive in identifying organizations that are boots on the ground. The Dream Center, man, we're not the only one. There are others in this country
Yeah.
who have made and demonstrated commitment to align with the corporate social responsibility goals of a company and say, listen, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel is already there. Let's just look at how do we link up and connect with this organization and help them grow. That I'm not seeing the way it ought to be. I ought to see it. It's not happening, and we have to do that. We got to change that.
Yeah, two words that you said resonate with me. One is identify the bottlenecks, because there are bottlenecks in
Yes.
the pipeline, right? The pipeline of candidates. And so that's the other word, pipeline. How do you develop pipeline? I'll relate to you one story that I think is relevant. When I worked for Bell Labs and I graduated with an undergrad, they had a program called 1 Year on Campus, because they knew that their bottleneck was there weren't enough candidates with masters and PhDs to fulfill their needs. So what they did, they created a program. You would get hired on with a bachelor's, and they would send you and sponsor you to go for your master's and your PhD, thus relieving that bottleneck through proactive measures. I think what corporations need to do, and what I'm hearing you saying, is that they need to reach back even further. And like you said, middle school, like the buyer of interest, and then find ways through organizations like yours to foster that development all the way through where they're then able to become a viable candidate.
I couldn't say that any better. I mean, John, you nailed it. That's it. That's it. And maybe perhaps that's the next step for us in our conversations. And perhaps the next time we do a podcast, I can report to you, because the structure is there for us. You've seen our structure. We have the pipeline.
Yeah.
But now we need corporate engagement to say, listen, we're going to support you in accelerating the success that we know you currently have. But if we could remove some bottlenecks and really get behind this, we can really scale this. And that's what we're talking about.
So if someone wants to find out a little bit more information on the Camden Dream Center, where do they go? Is there a website they can go to? Yeah,
www.camdendreamcenter.org. www.camdendreamcenter.org.
So with that, I'll end it here. Thanks again, Pastor Davis, for the great conversation today. Hopefully those out there got something from it. This is John Seaton with the Outliers Journey. Have a great day.
God bless. Thank you.